They wheeled me into cardiac surgery at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The last thing I remember was my son David holding my hand and saying, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of everything while you're recovering." When I woke up 4 days later, I still had my house. When I came home 2 weeks after that, I didn't. My own son, the boy I put through business school, the man I made partner in my consulting firm, had sold my house while I was unconscious and fighting for my life. But David made one crucial mistake. He forgot that I didn't just run a business for 30 years. I built it from nothing. And women who build empires don't go down without a fight, especially when they have the business connections to buy their son's house at foreclosure and evict him on Christmas morning. Let me tell you about the life I built before my son tried to steal it from under me. After my husband Richard died 15 years ago, I threw myself into work. Richardson Consulting, the firm Rick, started in our garage in 1978, became one of the most successful business advisory companies in the state. I wasn't just the grieving widow keeping her husband's legacy alive. I was the shark who turned a 2-person operation into a $50 million company with 43 employees and clients in 6 states. My house reflected that success. 4,000 square feet in Maple Heights, the kind of neighborhood where you needed references just to look at properties. Marble countertops, hardwood floors, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the garden Richard and I planned together. But more than that, it was home. Every room held memories. Richard's morning coffee ritual in the kitchen, dinner parties where we'd close million-dollar deals over dessert, David's high school graduation party on the back patio. David was my pride and joy. Valedictorian at Stanford, MBA from Wharton, sharp enough to run circles around men twice his age. When I made him junior partner at 28, nobody questioned it. The boy had earned it, or so I thought. What I didn't know was that David hadn't been earning anything. He'd been spending, gambling actually, and when his debts got bigger than his salary could handle, he started looking at my assets as his personal safety net. The heart attack probably saved his plan 6 months of scheming. On February 15th, I collapsed in my office during a client presentation. Massive cardiac event, they called it. Triple bypass surgery, touch and go for 72 hours. David was there every day, playing the devoted son. Brought flowers, spoke to the doctors, handled my business calls. The perfect picture of a loving child caring for his ailing mother. What he was actually doing was forging my signature on real estate documents. I spent 2 weeks in cardiac recovery. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, that I'd need months of rest and rehabilitation before I could even think about going back to work. David. I stay with him and his wife Monica while I recovered. "The house is too big for you to manage right now, Mom," he said. "You need to be somewhere people can keep an eye on you." I should have been suspicious. David's house was a cramped colonial in a middle-class neighborhood, a far cry from the luxury I was used to. But I was weak, grateful for the help, and touched by what I thought was his concern. Monica was nervous the entire time I was there, jumpy, avoiding eye contact, making excuses to leave the room whenever I wanted to discuss my recovery timeline or when I might go home. On my 3rd day there, I asked David to drive me to my house to pick up some clothes and personal items. "That's not a good idea, Mom," he said. "You're still recovering. I can get whatever you need." When I insisted, he said the house was being aired out and deep cleaned while I was away. When I said I didn't arrange for any cleaning service, he claimed he'd hired one as a surprise. That night, called my neighbor Margaret Chen. Margaret had been watching my house for years whenever I traveled, collecting mail, watering plants, generally keeping an eye on things. "Oh, Eleanor," Margaret said. "I'm so sorry to hear about David's decision. I know how much that house meant to you." "Decision? What decision?" "Well, you know, selling the house. The new owners seem nice enough, though. Young couple with a baby. They moved in yesterday." I hung up the phone and sat in David's guest room, staring at the wall, trying to process what Margaret had just told me. New owners. Moved in yesterday. My house. The house I'd lived in for 22 years. The house where my husband died, where I'd built my memories and my life, had been sold while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. I waited until David and Monica went to sleep. Then, I used Monica's laptop to search property records online. Sale date, February 20th, 5 days after my heart attack. Sale price, $847,000. Seller, Ellie. Represented by David Richardson. Tower of attorney. Buyer, Jackson Holdings, LLC. I didn't know what Jackson Holdings was, but I knew one thing for certain. I had never signed a power of attorney giving David the right to sell my house. But according to the county records, I had. My signature was right there on the legal documents, notarized and filed properly. Except I was unconscious in intensive care when those papers were supposedly signed. The next morning, I told David I needed to see my attorney immediately. He tried to talk me out of it, said I should focus on recovering, that business could wait. When I insisted, he offered to drive me himself and sit in on the meeting, to help you remember important details. That's when I knew for certain that my son had stolen my house. I told David I was taking a nap and needed some quiet time. Instead, I called a taxi and went directly to see Harold Morrison, my attorney for the past 12 years. Represented by David Richardson, Tower of attorney. Buyer, Jackson Holdings, LLC. I didn't know what Jackson Holdings was, but I knew one thing for certain. I had never signed a power of attorney giving David the right to sell my house. But according to the county records, I had. My signature was right there on the legal documents, notarized and filed properly. Except I was unconscious in intensive care when those papers were supposedly signed. The next morning, I told David I needed to see my attorney immediately. He tried to talk me out of it, said I should focus on recovering, that business could wait. When I insisted, he offered to drive me himself and sit in on the meeting, to help you remember important details. That's when I knew for certain that my son had stolen my house. I told David I was taking a nap and needed some quiet time. Instead, I called a taxi and went directly to see Harold Morrison, my attorney for the past 12 years. Harold's face went white when I walked into his office. "Eleanor, thank God you're all right. David told me you'd had a massive stroke in addition to the heart attack. He said you were in a coma and might never recover fully." I sat down slowly. "Harold, I need you to explain to me how my house got sold while I was unconscious." Harold pulled out a thick file. "David came to me 3 days after your surgery. He said you'd given him power of attorney before the operation because you were worried about your prognosis. He had all the paperwork, notarized, witnessed, completely legal. Harold, look at me. Do I look like someone who's had a massive stroke? Do I seem cognitively impaired?" Harold stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened the file and really looked at the power of attorney document. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "this signature. I've seen your signature thousands of times over the years. This looks like your signature, but what? But you always use a fountain pen. This was signed with a ballpoint. And your R in Richardson, you always make that little flourish at the end. This one doesn't have it." I leaned forward. "Harold, my son forged my signature to steal my house while I was fighting for my life. I want him prosecuted for fraud, and I want my house back." Harold nodded grimly. "Eleanor, we're not just talking about fraud. We're talking about elder abuse, forgery, and possibly conspiracy if Monica was involved. This is serious federal crime territory. Good, I said, because I'm feeling pretty serious about getting justice. Harold and I spent the next 3 hours planning my counterattack. But first, we needed to understand exactly what David had done and how far the fraud extended. The power of attorney wasn't the only forged document. David had also created a fake will, naming himself as sole beneficiary and executor. He'd opened bank accounts in my name. He'd even applied for credit cards, my information. But here's where David's business school education failed him. He'd forgotten the most important rule of corporate warfare. Always assume your opponent is smarter than you think they are. And I hadn't built a $50 million consulting firm by playing fair. Harold helped me understand the full scope of David's scheme. He hadn't just stolen my house. He'd been systematically positioning himself to inherit everything I owned, using forged documents to make it all look legal. Jackson Holdings, LLC, the company that bought my house, that was David's shell company. He'd sold my house to himself for $847,000, then immediately took out a mortgage against it for $900,000. So not only had he stolen my house, he'd borrowed against it and pocketed over $1.7 million in the process. But David had made several critical errors that were about to destroy him. Error number 1. He'd used his real address when setting up Jackson Holdings. Corporate filings are public record. People who owe you favors and people who respect what you've built. I called Marcus Webb, president of First National Bank, the bank that held David's mortgage on my house. Marcus, I said, I have a situation that might interest you. One of your borrowers obtained a loan using fraudulent collateral. Marcus had been a client of mine for 8 years. When I explained the situation, he immediately flagged David's account for investigation. Then I called Rebecca Torres, a real estate investor who'd made millions flipping properties. Rebecca owed me a favor. I'd helped her structure a deal that saved her company from bankruptcy in 2018. Rebecca, I need to buy a house at foreclosure, and I need to buy it fast. What's the property? I gave her David's address. Rebecca laughed. Eleanor, what exactly are you planning? Voice with grim satisfaction. I'm planning to evict my son on Christmas morning. The wheels of justice move slowly, but when you have the right connection, unlimited resources, they can move very efficiently. Harold filed criminal charges against David for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The FBI opened an investigation into his financial crimes. Patricia's forensic analysis proved that David had stolen over $2.2 million from various sources. My house, my business accounts, credit cards opened in my name, and several fraudulent loans. But the most beautiful part of my revenge was still coming. Marcus Webb's investigation into David's mortgage revealed that the loan had been obtained using fraudulent documents. The bank immediately called in the full amount, $900,000, due immediately. When David couldn't pay because he'd already gambled away most of the money, the bank foreclosed on his house. That's when Rebecca Torres stepped in with a cash offer for the full amount owed to the bank. And who do you think provided Rebecca with the cash for that purchase? On December 23rd, I became the owner of David's house. On December 24th, I served him with eviction papers. On December 25th, I watched my son carry his belongings to a rental truck while his neighbors stared and whispered. You might think that sounds cruel. A mother evicting her son on Christmas morning. But let me tell you what David did with the money he stole from me. He didn't pay off his debts. He didn't invest it wisely. He didn't even buy something that would hold its value. He spent $1.8 million in 6 months at casinos and online gambling sites. My life's work, my home, my security. He turned it all into poker chips and slot machine tokens. Monica filed for divorce 2 weeks after the eviction. Turns out she'd been planning to leave him anyway, once she realized the extent of his gambling problem. She'd been nervous during my recovery, not because she was guilty, but because she was terrified of what David might do next. The criminal trial took 8 months. David pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, but he's still go. Years in federal prison. He'll be out in 2.5 years if he behaves himself. But here's the thing about consequences. They don't end when the prison sentence does. David is a convicted felon now. He can't work in finance or consulting. He can't get professional licenses. He can't even vote. The business I spent 30 years building, I sold it to my senior partners for $60 million. David's name was permanently removed from all company documents. The house he stole from me? I got it back, along with punitive damages that totaled $3.4 million. As for David's house, the one I bought at foreclosure, I didn't keep it. I sold it to a lovely young family with 2 small children. The husband is a teacher, the wife is a nurse. They're the kind of people who actually deserve a nice home. I used the profit from that sale to establish the Richardson Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. Every year, we help a dozen families recover from financial abuse by their own relatives. People ask me if I miss my son, if I wish things could have been different. The truth is, I miss the son I thought I had. The one who earned his partnership through hard work. The one who held my hand in the hospital. The one who called me every Sunday just to check in. But that son was a lie. The real David, the one who forged my signature while I was unconscious, who stole my home while I was recovering from heart surgery, who gambled away my life's work like it was nothing. I don't miss him at all. David taught me something valuable in the end, though not the lesson he intended. He taught me that blood doesn't make someone family. Loyalty does. Respect does. Love does. And he taught me that sometimes the people who know you best are the most dangerous, because they know exactly how to hurt you. But most importantly, he taught me that I'm stronger at 68 than I ever imagined. I live in a beautiful penthouse now, downtown, with a view of the river and 24-hour security. I travel when I want to, donate to causes I believe in, and sleep peacefully knowing that no one can ever steal my home again. And every Christmas morning, I raise a glass of champagne and toast the lesson I taught my son. When you try to bury your mother while she's still breathing, you better make sure she stays dead. Because if she doesn't, she might just bury you instead. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, it's best served with foreclosure papers on Christmas morning. David learned that the hard way. And now everyone knows. You don't steal from Eleanor Richardson and expect to keep what you took. Some lessons you only have to teach once.